Water has always been my refuge, not the crashing waves of oceans or the chlorinated confines of pools, but the still, perfect mirror of Evergreen Lake. This 20-acre body of water has been in my family since my grandfather purchased the surrounding land in 1967. He parceled and sold most of the property, but kept the lake and our 3 acres of lakefront land intact. I inherited it 15 years ago, and it has been my sanctuary ever since. Every morning begins the same way. I rise before the sun, when darkness still blankets the world and the only sounds are distant owl calls and the occasional splash of a fish hunting for breakfast. I walk down the path worn smooth by decades of footsteps, my grandfather's, my father's, and now mine. The wooden dock creaks beneath my weight, a familiar symphony of aged timber that has weathered countless seasons. I take my kayak out when the first light breaks over the eastern tree line. The paddles cut through glass-still water, creating ripples that expand outward like time itself. These moments alone on the water connect me to something larger than myself. It is meditation. It is prayer. It is the closest thing to perfect peace I have ever known. In the evenings, I fish, not always for dinner, though the bass and trout in these waters taste like memories. Sometimes I fish simply to participate in the ancient dialogue between human and nature. My line forms perfect arcs against the setting sun. The world grows quiet. Problems that seemed insurmountable on land shrink to nothing on the water. The houses around the lake have changed over the years. What once were modest cabins have transformed into larger homes as property values increased. New families moved in. The community evolved, but the lake remained constant, a shared treasure that everyone respected without needing rules or governance. That changed 3 years ago when enough new homeowners gathered to form what they called the Evergreen Shores Homeowners Association. I ignored the initial paperwork. My property predated their organization by decades. I had no interest in their architectural review committees or their opinions about acceptable mailbox designs. They started small. Letters about lawn maintenance arrived in my mailbox. Emails about community standards filled my inbox. I deleted most without reading them fully. Live and let live had always been my philosophy. The lake was my concern. What others did with their properties was their business. Then came the first official warning. Notice of violation, excess natural vegetation along shoreline. The letter was printed on expensive paper with an embossed logo at the top. It claimed my natural cattails and water lilies were unsightly and reduced property values. They requested removal within 14 days. I called the number listed and explained that these plants were essential to the lake's ecosystem. They provided habitat for frogs and dragonflies. They filtered runoff. They prevented erosion. The woman on the phone, Cheryl, I would later learn, seemed uninterested in biology lessons. The aesthetic guidelines have been approved by the board, she stated flatly. Compliance is not optional. I hung up and continued my life. The cattails stayed, more letters arrived, each more strongly worded than the last. At the community's summer barbecue, I overheard conversations that made my blood run cold. Board members referred to our lake and community water access as if the lake had somehow become communal property. One man discussed plans for a proper beach area on what was unquestionably my land. When I politely corrected him, explaining the property lines and water rights, he smiled condescendingly. "Times change," he said, tapping his beer bottle against mine. "Nobody owns nature anymore." I should have taken it more seriously. I should have seen the fence coming. But some threats are too outlandish to believe until they materialize before your eyes. And so life continued. My mornings on the water, my evenings with the fish, my quiet existence in harmony with the lake. Until the morning I walked down my path and found a barrier where there had never been one before. A tall metal fence with a locked gate and a sign that read, Evergreen SHORES Community Lake Access, authorized KEYHOLDERS only. My world had been cut in half overnight. I stood before the fence for nearly an hour that first morning, trying to comprehend its existence. It stretched from the tree line on one side of my access point to the rocky outcropping on the other, effectively cutting off my direct path to the dock. The metal was new, shining silver in the morning light. The padlock was heavy-duty industrial grade. This was no temporary measure. This was permanent infrastructure. My kayak sat in the grass behind me, rendered useless. The fishing rod in my hand suddenly felt like a prop from someone else's life. I touched the fence, half expecting it to dissolve beneath my fingers like some awful mirage. It did not. Cold, solid, real. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA president's number. No answer. I left a message that started calm but ended with my voice shaking. Then I sent an email demanding immediate explanation. Hours passed. No response. That evening, I learned that an emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled for 7:00 p.m. at the community center. I arrived early, notebook in hand, property documents loaded on my tablet. The room filled quickly. Neighbors I had known for years avoided my gaze. Others watched me with open curiosity, as if awaiting an explosion. Cheryl Vernon entered last, flanked by two board members. She wore a crisp white blouse and carried a leather portfolio with the HOA logo embossed on its cover. Her smile never reached her eyes as she called the meeting to order. Before we address the agenda items, I understand Mr. Harrison has concerns about the lake access improvements, she said, gesturing toward me without actually looking in my direction. Let us address that briefly. I stood, documents ready. That fence was installed on my property without permission, notice, or legal right. I want it removed immediately. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The fence, Cheryl replied with practiced patience, was installed on the community easement that runs along the lake perimeter. It is for safety and common access control. Children were accessing the water unsupervised. Insurance liability has become a concern. There is no community easement on my property, I stated flatly. The lake and 50 feet of shoreline have been privately owned by my family since 1967. I have the survey and deed right here. Cheryl smiled, the kind of smile that precedes unpleasantness. The board has reviewed the documentation and consulted with our attorneys. The easement exists by prescription due to decades of community use. The fence stays. Keys will be distributed to all homeowners in good standing next week. Good standing. The implication was clear. My resistance to their previous demands meant I would not be receiving a key to access my own lake. This is illegal, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. You cannot fence off property you do not own. A man in the back, new to the neighborhood, I had never seen him before, shouted, "Just follow the rules like everyone else." Others nodded. The room split visibly, long-time residents looking uncomfortable, newer homeowners emboldened. Cheryl utilized the division masterfully, moving quickly to the next agenda item as if the matter was settled. I remained standing. When do I get my key? Applications for lake access will be processed in order of submission once compliance with all HOA guidelines has been verified, she answered without looking up from her notes. Now, regarding the upcoming fall festival. I walked out, my hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. For the first time in 15 years, I would not end my day with sunset on the water. The next 2 weeks passed in a fog of rage and disbelief. I submitted the key application forms. They responded with a list of property violations that required correction first. The natural vegetation, an unapproved bird feeder, the color of my shed. I called a lawyer who explained that fighting would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guaranteed outcome. Every morning I walked to the fence and looked through it at my dock. Every evening I watched others with keys unlock the gate and access my lake while I stood excluded from my own property. My boat collected dust. My fishing rods hung unused. Then one night, unable to sleep, I began researching property lines, easements, and county records. I was not a lawyer, but I was methodical. I downloaded surveys. I examined plat maps. I compared historical documentation. And there it was, a discrepancy so small I almost missed it. At the very corner where the fence met the tree line was a sliver of land, perhaps 20 feet wide, that appeared on no HOA documents. It was listed separately in county records with a different parcel number and owner name, Martin Grayson. The name meant nothing to me, but the location was everything. This forgotten parcel touched both the road and the critical corner of the fence. Whoever owned this neglected strip of land controlled the choke point of the entire barrier. I needed to find Martin Grayson. The county record's office smelled of dust and forgotten paper. Ancient fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I waited for the clerk to return with the files I had requested. 2 hours of my vacation time spent sitting on an uncomfortable plastic chair, but I did not care. I was hunting now, focused with an intensity that surprised even me. "Here you go," said the elderly clerk, dropping a surprisingly thin folder on the counter. "Parcel 247B19. Not much there, I am afraid." He was right. Martin Grayson had purchased the small strip of land in 1972, likely as an investment when the lake community was first developing. Property taxes had been paid automatically from a trust fund for decades. Martin himself had died in 1997, according to attached probate documents. No heirs had claimed the land. It had simply continued existing, forgotten by everyone except the automated systems that kept it in good standing with the county. "What happens to land with no owner?" I asked the clerk. He adjusted his glasses. "Eventually, it escheats to the state, but that takes years of tax delinquency. This one is still current on payments." He studied my interest with professional curiosity. "Why this particular parcel? Not much you can build there." "I am not looking to build," I replied honestly, "just exploring options." That afternoon, I contacted the trust company listed on the tax records. After navigating a labyrinth of automated phone systems, I reached a human who confirmed what I already suspected. The trust was set to expire within the year. The funds were nearly depleted. No beneficiaries remained. The land would likely be sold for back taxes eventually. I consulted a real estate attorney who specialized in unusual property acquisitions. Her office was small but tidy, with diplomas covering one wall and family photos on the other. "Quiet title action," she said after reviewing my documents. "We filed to establish clear ownership based on the absence of other claims. It is complex but possible." She named her fee. It was substantial but not prohibitive. "How long?" I asked. "Minimum 3 months. Could be 6 if anyone contests." I wrote the check that afternoon. Meanwhile, the HOA intensified their campaign against me. My email address was removed from the community listserv. My requests for HOA meeting minutes went unanswered. My name appeared in the newsletter under ongoing compliance issues. Cheryl began distributing flyers about community members disrupting neighborhood harmony. No names were mentioned, but the lake access dispute was described in terms that clearly identified me as the problem. According to the flyer, one homeowner was selfishly attempting to restrict the community's long-established lake privileges. Neighbors began to take sides. Some avoided me entirely. Others stopped by with quiet words of support, but were unwilling to speak publicly against the increasingly powerful HOA. A few brave souls brought over beers and commiseration, sharing their own stories of Cheryl's overreach. She fined the Johnsons $200 because their Christmas lights stayed up 3 days past the January deadline, said Tom Baker, a retired teacher who had lived across the street for decades. Their daughter was in the hospital with pneumonia, and they still had to pay or face a lien. Another neighbor, Maria, revealed that her garden had been measured with a ruler to ensure compliance with height restrictions. 7 inches too tall, she said, rolling her eyes. I had to cut down my sunflowers because they violated the aesthetic guidelines. These stories strengthened my resolve. This was no longer just about my lake access. It was about standing against petty tyranny dressed up as community standards. The legal process ground forward slowly. Papers were filed. Notices were published in local papers seeking any claimants to the land. Weeks passed with no challenges. The HOA, focused on their apparent victory with the fence, seemed oblivious to my quiet legal maneuvering. Then came the letter I had been waiting for. The court had granted my petition. The quiet title action was successful. For a surprisingly reasonable sum, the remaining trust balance plus legal fees, I had become the legal owner of parcel 247B19. I owned the land where the corner of the fence stood. I owned the only viable access point to the gate. I owned the key to my revenge. The deed arrived on a Tuesday, crisp official paper declaring me the legal owner of a seemingly insignificant strip of land. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal of the county records office, feeling a satisfaction deeper than I had experienced in months. This small document represented more than property ownership. It represented the restoration of balance. I waited for the monthly HOA meeting before making my move. Strategic patience had got me this far. I could endure one more week of walking past the fence that separated me from my lake. The community center was more crowded than usual that evening. Word had spread that tensions were high. People love conflict when they are not directly involved. It makes for good stories at dinner parties and over backyard fences. I arrived early, selecting a seat near the front where Cheryl could not ignore me. I placed my folder on the table, property deed on top, visible to anyone who looked closely enough. Several board members noticed, exchanging glances but saying nothing. Cheryl arrived exactly on time, not a minute earlier or later. Control extended even to punctuality in her world. She called the meeting to order with practiced efficiency, moving briskly through agenda items with minimal discussion. Committee reports, budget approvals, seasonal decoration guidelines. When she reached open floor, I raised my hand immediately. She pretended not to see it at first, acknowledging 3 other speakers with less contentious concerns. But eventually the room's attention shifted to me, the hand that remained stubbornly aloft. Yes, Mr. Harrison, please keep it brief. We have numerous items to cover tonight. I stood and approached the front table, placing my deed squarely before the board members. I wanted to inform the HOA of a recent property acquisition, I said, my voice steadier than my pounding heart suggested possible. I now own parcel 247B19, the land at the northwest corner of the lake access point. Cheryl glanced at the document with obvious disinterest. Congratulations on your purchase. How does this concern the association? The fence the HOA installed last month crosses my newly acquired property. As the legal owner, I am exercising my right to remove that portion of the fence and install my own access control measures. The room grew silent. Board members leaned forward to examine the deed more closely. Cheryl's composure slipped for just a moment, a tightening around the eyes, a slight flush across her cheeks before she regained control. The easement applies to all lake perimeter property, she stated flatly. The fence location is legally sound regardless of parcel ownership. There is no recorded easement on this specific parcel, I replied, sliding forward a second document prepared by my attorney. My deed is clear and unencumbered. The fence crosses private property without permission. That constitutes trespass. A board member, Walter, I think his name was, whispered something in Cheryl's ear. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. We will have our attorney review this situation, she announced, attempting to move the documents aside. Next agenda item. No need to wait, I interrupted. I have already consulted with both county officials and my attorney. The fence modification will begin tomorrow morning. I wanted to inform the board as a courtesy. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone in the back actually applauded before being shushed. Cheryl's smile became brittle. Any modification to the security fence will be considered vandalism and reported to the authorities. It is not vandalism to modify structures on your own property, I replied calmly. I have the permits necessary for the work. Again, this is simply a courtesy notification. I returned to my seat. The meeting continued, but attention had scattered. People whispered to each other. Several checked their phones, undoubtedly searching property records to verify my claims. Cheryl rushed through the remaining agenda items with uncharacteristic haste. The next morning, I was at the fence corner at exactly 8:00 a.m., the county-approved time for construction work to begin. A locksmith arrived 15 minutes later. We worked efficiently, removing the section of fence on my property and installing a new gate with a different lock. By noon, a new sign hung on my freshly installed gate, Private access, property owner only. I texted a photo of the completed work to my attorney, who confirmed everything was in compliance with local ordinances. Then I sent the same photo to the 5 neighbors who had quietly supported me through the ordeal. By evening, the neighborhood message boards exploded with activity. Some residents were outraged, demanding emergency HOA action. Others expressed admiration for the creative solution. Many simply asked practical questions. How would lake access work now? Who controlled the gate? What happened to the keys they had been issued? Cheryl sent an urgent community notice via email and paper flyers distributed to each house. It described my actions as hostile, damaging to community cohesion, and potentially illegal. The final paragraph promised swift legal action to restore proper access protocols. My phone rang less than an hour after the flyers appeared. It was Cheryl herself, her voice tightly controlled. "This is unacceptable," she said without preamble. "The board is prepared to file for an emergency injunction tomorrow morning." "On what grounds?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Interference with established community access. The lake is a shared resource." "The lake is my private property with limited access rights granted at my discretion," I corrected. "Those rights never included installing permanent structures without permission. The fence was illegal from the start." "We will let the courts decide," she snapped before hanging up. I slept soundly that night for the first time in months. Through my bedroom window, I could see the lake gleaming under moonlight. Tomorrow, I would kayak again. The HOA's response came swiftly and with surprising creativity. A courier delivered an official notice the next morning. "Violation, unauthorized signage, and alteration of community property. Fine, $500. Daily accrual, $100 until remediation complete." I folded the notice carefully and filed it with my growing collection of HOA communications. My attorney had anticipated this move and advised me to document everything but take no immediate action. "Let them dig the hole deeper," she had said. 3 days later, a more formal letter arrived from Bradford and Winters, LLC, the HOA's legal representation. It contained phrases like cease and desist, tortious interference, and community covenant violations. The letter demanded immediate restoration of the original fence and threatened legal action if compliance was not received within 72 hours. My attorney responded with a methodically researched 12-page document that cited county records, property law precedents, and, most devastatingly, the HOA's own founding documents, which explicitly excluded my original lakefront property from their jurisdiction. The final paragraph noted that any further harassment would result in a countersuit for damages. While these legal salvos flew back and forth, the neighborhood itself became a battleground of smaller aggressions. Someone scattered roofing nails across my driveway. My mailbox disappeared overnight, only to be found floating in the lake the next morning. Anonymous notes appeared: "Lake thief and selfish jerk." But for every act of hostility, there came unexpected support. Maria from 3 houses down brought homemade bread and whispered that several neighbors were discussing whether to challenge Cheryl in the next board election. Tom Baker helped me install security cameras around my property. Even Mrs. Ellison, who rarely spoke to anyone, stopped me on my morning walk to say, "Good for you, standing up to those busybodies." The community had become polarized. At the grocery store, certain neighbors would turn their carts to avoid passing me in the aisles. Others would deliberately seek me out to offer a supportive word or knowing nod. What had begun as a dispute over lake access had evolved into something larger, a referendum on the HOA's growing power and the culture it fostered. Cheryl seemed to sense the shifting mood. Her tactics escalated accordingly. The HOA newsletter now featured a monthly community compliance corner that transparently targeted my property without nomming me directly. Board members were seen photographing my yard from the sidewalk, documenting any potential violations. Then came the direct confrontation I had been anticipating. I was working in my front garden when Cheryl's luxury SUV pulled to a stop at my curb. She emerged alone, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete as she approached. "This has gone far enough," she said without greeting. "You are tearing this community apart with your stubbornness." I continued pruning my rose bush. "I am simply exercising my legal property rights." "Nobody likes a troublemaker," she said, her voice dropping lower. "Homes get reevaluated for tax purposes. Insurance rates change. People find themselves unwelcome in their own neighborhoods. Is that what you want?" I stood then, facing her directly. "Are you threatening me, Cheryl?" She stepped back, professional smile returning instantly. "Simply pointing out potential consequences of continued disruption. The board is prepared to offer a compromise." "I am listening." "You maintain ownership of your parcel. We acknowledge your property rights. But you grant an easement for the gate and allow community access on the original schedule. And in return, all fines forgiven, your lake access restored immediately, a seat on the Lake Management Committee." I studied her face, the practiced neutrality, the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way through a combination of persistence and intimidation. For a moment I considered accepting. Peace would return. Life would be simpler. "No," I said finally. "The fence comes down entirely, or my gate remains the only access point." Her expression hardened. "Then prepare for a lengthy legal battle, and do not expect community support when things get difficult." As her car pulled away, I noticed several neighbors watching from windows and porches. The lines had been drawn more clearly than any property boundary. There would be no easy resolution now. I did not see the reporter at first. She was sitting quietly at the back of the room during the next HOA meeting, notebook in hand, occasionally taking photos with her phone. Only when Cheryl called for new business did she stand and introduce herself. "Melissa Chen, Lakeview Herald," she said, her press badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "I am researching a story on homeowners associations and property rights disputes. Would the board be willing to comment on the ongoing situation regarding lake access and the recently installed fence?" The room went silent. Board members exchanged panicked glances. Cheryl's composure cracked visibly before she regained control. "This is a private meeting," she stated firmly. "Media presence must be approved in advance. I must ask you to leave." "Actually," the reporter replied calmly, "HOA meetings are legally required to be open to the public under state statute 47.8b. I have the right to observe, though you can certainly decline to comment for my story." I had not contacted any media outlets. To this day, I do not know who tipped off the reporter, but her presence changed everything. The article appeared 3 days later on the front page of the local section. "Lake Access Lockout. HOA Fence Sparks Property Rights Battle." It was meticulously researched, featuring satellite images of the property lines, quotes from legal experts, and a timeline of events beginning with the HOA formation. The reporter had even uncovered previous complaints against our HOA for overstepping authority in other matters. Most damaging was the financial disclosure section, which revealed that the fence had cost over $22,000, far more than the amount approved in any public meeting. Questions were raised about contractor selection and potential conflicts of interest. The story spread quickly beyond our community. Regional news picked it up. A popular legal blog featured it as a case study in HOA overreach. My phone began ringing with calls from strangers facing similar situations in other communities. An emergency HOA meeting was called the following week. Attendance was unprecedented, nearly every household represented. The room hummed with tension as Cheryl called for order. "Recent media coverage has distorted the facts regarding community improvements," she began. "The board wishes to clarify." She was interrupted by Martin Weber, a usually quiet resident who owned one of the largest properties in the community. "I move for an immediate board resignation and new elections," he announced loudly. "The current leadership has lost the confidence of the homeowners." Voices rose in support. Others objected. The carefully maintained order of HOA meetings dissolved into something more democratic and messy. Cheryl banged her gavel repeatedly, but the momentum had shifted decisively. "This is out of order," she insisted, voice rising. There are procedures for grievances. There are also procedures for installing fences and spending community funds, called someone from the back. Procedures you ignored. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By its end, a non-binding vote of no confidence had passed overwhelmingly. Cheryl and 2 board members announced their resignations, effective immediately. An interim board was established, comprised mostly of long-time residents with moderate views on community governance. The next afternoon, the interim board president, Tom Baker, my retired teacher neighbor, knocked on my door. "We have reviewed the documentation," he said without preamble. "The fence was never properly approved, the expenditure exceeded authorized limits, and most importantly, it was installed on private property without consent." He extended his hand. "On behalf of the association, I apologize." Within a week, contractors removed the remaining sections of fence. The gate on my property, which I had never actually locked, was also removed at my request. The lake stood open again, accessible as it had always been. To celebrate, I organized a small gathering by the shore. Nothing formal, just coolers of drinks, a grill for burgers, and an open invitation to the community. More people came than I expected. Some apologized for staying silent. Others thanked me for standing firm. A few admitted they had enjoyed the drama from a distance. As sunset painted the lake in amber and gold, I realized something important had been preserved. Not just my access to the water, but a principle worth defending. Early morning on the lake has a quality that cannot be captured in words. Mist rises from the water like dreams escaping into daylight. The world holds its breath in these moments, suspended between what was and what will be. I have come to appreciate these quiet times even more since the fence came down. My kayak slides through the water, leaving ripples that expand and fade. Fish dart beneath the surface, acknowledging my presence without fear. Birds call from the shoreline, their voices carrying across the still water with perfect clarity. This is what I fought for, not ownership in the legal sense, but connection. The right to exist in relationship with this place that has shaped my life. The small strip of land that changed everything has been transformed as well. What was once an overlooked boundary has become a garden path lined with native plants and smooth stones. A hand-carved wooden sign reads simply Lakeside Way, an intentional double meaning that makes me smile each time I pass it. The path is beautiful now, more welcoming than any fence. Neighbors use it daily, nodding greetings as they make their way to the water. Children have decorated some of the larger stones with painted fish and turtles. An elderly couple often sits on the bench I installed beneath the old oak tree, watching the sunset with fingers intertwined. The space has become genuinely communal in a way no committee could have engineered. The HOA still exists, but in altered form. The new board, elected 6 months after the fence removal, focuses on community building rather than restriction enforcement. They organize seasonal celebrations, coordinate volunteer maintenance projects, and mediate the occasional dispute between neighbors. Their quarterly newsletter highlights community achievements rather than compliance failures. Cheryl moved away shortly after her resignation. I heard she joined a gated community with even stricter regulations. Perhaps she found the control she sought there. I wish her well, though I doubt she extends the same courtesy to me. Some wounds healed faster than others. Certain neighbors who had been particularly vocal against me still avoid eye contact when we pass on the street. Others required time before tentative waves became conversations, conversations became invitations. Community is complicated that way, both fragile and resilient, damaged easily but never beyond repair. The experience changed me as well. I find myself more engaged in local governance, attending county meetings and speaking up on issues that might have once seemed too political or controversial. I have become something of an informal consultant for people facing HOA disputes in nearby communities. My standard advice is simple. Know your rights, document everything, and remember that most conflicts have legal solutions if you are patient enough to find them. Last month, a reporter from a national magazine contacted me about including our story in a feature on property rights and community governance. I agreed to an interview, but declined to be photographed. This was never about becoming a figurehead for a movement. It was about preserving something precious from unnecessary control. This morning, like every morning, I walked down to the lake before sunrise. The water was perfectly still, mirroring the fatting stars above. My dock creaked familiarly beneath my weight as I sat with feet dangling just above the surface. A fish jumped nearby, sending concentric circles across the glass-like water. In that moment, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for winning the battle over the fence, but for the reminder that some things are worth fighting for. That standing up to bullies, even those draped in authority and procedure, is sometimes the only way to preserve what matters most. The lake has always been more than property to me. It is memory and connection, solitude and community. Now it carries another layer of meaning, a testament to the power of quiet persistence against unreasonable control. The water reflects my face back to me, and I see someone stronger than before, someone who understands that freedom sometimes requires defense. Dawn breaks over the eastern shore. Another day begins. The lake is mine again, and in a deeper sense it always was.